Peace, family. This is your brother Jabari once again here on the platform built by our brother Son Netter. He's doing amazing things, bringing consciousness to our people, and I'm so excited that I am once again honored to be in front of him. I'm also excited to have an opportunity to discuss some important issues with Brother Zion Lex. All of you know that we had a contentious debate several months ago.
We finally have the opportunity to see one another face to face.
I have been looking forward to getting with this brother. Some people have said that he's running for me or I'm running for him. Neither of us were running from each other.
Now, I heard Jabari come up here and say that there were rumors that Zion Lex was running. I want to know where he getting his information from. There were rumors that Jabari was running. I don't know where that information is coming from. I know that's how I feel, but I want to know where the information is coming from.
All right, let's get it in. I also want to come here to the judgment scene. Brothers and sisters, if you are familiar with Kemet, you are familiar with the judgment scene.
After I questioned Jabari meticulously on the origins of Ma'at,
if you listen carefully, you're going to find that much of what he described has nothing to do with this discussion.
Jabari says Ma'at has no origins. We see Ma'at as the very stuff of the universe. We see Ma'at as existing before the universe ever came into existence.
I said that we don't know who first brought Ma'at. That's absolutely true. I can't tell you the name of the scribe that first uttered the name Ma'at.
So we don't have a concept of the origins of Ma'at itself. What I believe Brother Zion Lex wants to talk about is who first described Ma'at. Let me quote him verbatim.
But that is not necessary because Ma'at exists thousands of years before the sources he's trying to tell you.
I believe that Brother Zion Lex really wants to ask, well, who was the first one? And he turns around, he looks at the camera and says, we don't know, family. We honestly don't know.
Ma'at has no origin. I was talking about the philosophical underpinning of who Ma'at was in the creation story.
Here's the problem we have, Brother Jabari.
I was switching between a historical story and a philosophical spiritual story.
When you cannot tell me who was the first person to introduce Ma'at into Kemet,
but he's trying to do a little bit of intellectual flim-flam on you.
That means you on record acknowledging that you don't know who the author of Ma'at is in terms of introducing it to a people or a civilization. And we cannot hop, skip, and jump to conclusions that Kemet is the author of Ma'at when you yourself are on camera saying, family, we do not know.
If you listen to what he's saying, he must be fighting another opponent. I'm waiting in the ring for him to step in, and he's fighting somebody in the aisle. Those blows don't address me. Those blows don't even come near me. I don't even need to bob and weave. I'm standing in the ring with the referee saying, look at that, what is he doing? And the referee's just going, I don't know. Because nobody knows what he's doing.
Describe Ma'at. Let me quote him verbatim. I believe that Brother Zion Lex really wants to ask, well, who was the first one? And he turns around, he looks at the camera and says, we don't know, family. We honestly don't know. We don't know, family. We honestly don't know.
Well, brothers and sisters, please don't let the glasses fool you. We are both black men that had to come up the hard way. And I'm telling you that even though I'm a Kemetic priest, I would always be able to equate myself physically.
Well, who was the first one? And he turns around, he looks at the camera and says, we don't know, family. We honestly don't know.
Peace, family. This is your brother Jabari once again here on the platform built by our brother Son Netter. He's doing amazing things, bringing consciousness to our people, and I'm so excited that I am once again honored to be in front of him. I'm also excited to have an opportunity to discuss some important issues with Brother Zion Lex. All of you know that we had a contentious debate several months ago. And I have been looking forward to getting with this brother. Some people have said that he's running for me or I'm running for him. Neither of us were running from each other. This is a situation where we had to agree on the parameters. You obviously know that there were some disagreements about some of the comments that were made on other platforms. All of that had to be hashed out so that we could once more come to you with information. So this evening, I want to address some of the things that I did not get to address in our first dialogue. Our first dialogue was shortened. It was shortened. So perhaps I'll be able to share some of this information with you today, and I believe that you'll feel it uplifting. Today's conversation is called The Origin of Ma'at and Debunking the Scholarship of Brother Zion Lex. So let's get it in. First of all, I have heard so many of you say that I did not deal with the fact that I said that 8 of the 10 Commandments came from the 42 negative confessions. I've heard you say it on your platforms. I heard you say it on the street. People keep saying it. And I'm going to say to you right off the bat, I did not deal with it. Our debate was truncated. So let me see if I can get to it here. These are the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at. I have not done inequity. I have not robbed with violence. I have not stolen. I have not done murder. These are all of the 42 negative confessions. And I want you to understand that if you want to take a closer look at these, I'm not going to read all 42. You can easily Google 42 laws, 42 principles of Ma'at, and you'll get a chance to see them. Usually they come in the same order, so I hope that you're able to see what I'm seeing, brothers and sisters. So here are the 10 Commandments. This is what I did not do in the first debate. And part of the reason why I didn't do it is because as we went through it, I thought it would be a quick conversation, but Brother Zion Lex decided to read everything in Hebrew and in English. And then when I asked him, well, what's the difference? He said, there's lots of differences, but he didn't tell me the differences. So I have never pretended to be a Hebrew scholar. That is not something that I come to in excellence. But what I want you to know is that I did not deal with it, not because I couldn't deal with it, but because I did not have the time. I thought that it was better for me to deal with something else. This comes from this book. In fact, I don't even know if most of you have it. I know that many of you who are studying ancient Kemet have the Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, but you might not have the study guide. And so I'm going to say to you that it's an important additional tool to receive. So you can see here that the first part of the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me. That is very similar. In fact, I would argue that it has its origin in the 41st of the 42 laws of Ma'at. And when you go to the second law, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, that is not in the 42 laws, the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at. And therefore, that is one of the commandments that I was not referring to. You'll also note that I will also argue to you that all of them, you'll see almost all of them have a real connection to all of these traditions. You'll even see, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord God in vain. That's similar to 7, 37, and 41. Just understand that there is a really firm basis for that comment. Very firm basis for that comment. And it doesn't primarily come from me. It comes from several other African scholars. If you want to read more about it, pick up Brother Anthony Browder's Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. All right, let's get it in. I also want to come here to the judgment scene. Brothers and sisters, if you are familiar with Kemet, you are familiar with the judgment scene. It is that time that someone comes before the scales of Ma'at and has their heart weighed against the feather. Now, in this scene, you'll note that at the very top, you will see this individual, in this instance, this is Hunefer, approaching the deities that are in the Hall of Ma'ati. And you'll see that some of them have ankhs on their knees and some of them do not. In fact, there is, in this instance, a tie. And because there's a tie, what does now Hunefer need to do? He has to now go to have his heart weighed against the feather of Ma'at. He is led in by Anpu, that deity that you may have heard as Anubis. And that's the Greek name, so you won't hear me use many of the Greek names. What you'll actually see is his heart is lighter than a feather, and then he is led into greeting the deity, the divine the divine nature of the afterlife, Asar. And you see him sitting here with a green face. Sometimes that face is depicted in the darkest black possible. Sitting on a throne with the two ladies known as the Meri behind him. Now, there's a reason why I'm explaining this to you. After your heart is weighed, you are then described as your name and Asar. So if this was me and I was found Makeru, true of voice, the next scene would say that I am Jabari Asar. I have become Asar. Understand that a fundamental principle of Kemetic spirituality is that you are divine. And in saying that, I want you to understand that this is the reason why Brother Zion Lex does not see a description from a deity saying you will not. Because ultimately you are the deity. This is a fundamental principle of Kemetic spirituality. I've said often, for those of you who have heard me preach and teach, that we have these divine powers, but right now we have a lot of power and no control. We're like babies with chainsaws. And so understanding that you are divine means that this particular description of a series, a moral code, would sound very different than it does in the Abrahamic traditions. The Abrahamic traditions render the deity outside of themselves. So of course you would see something that says, I will tell you not to do this. It doesn't occur that way in ancient Kemet. Let's move on. Let's talk more about the origin of Ma'at. Now, some of you recognize that Ma'at is usually personified as a beautiful African woman with her feather on her head and wings on her arms. This is usually the way that she is depicted. Now, some of you are saying, and I've been listening to some of your channels, some of you are saying, well, if she's a person, how can she be a principle? If she's a principle, how can she be a person? Understand that this is divine sacred symbolism. I will never argue to you that there was actually a woman that was a major proponent of judgment, a major proponent of the order, that actually walked in physical form with a feather on her head. This is spiritual symbolism occurring here. And so that is a very important point. So understand that she is personified as a woman, but she also is a representation of truth, order, balance, harmony, law, morality, and justice. Sometimes you will hear people say there are 7 principles of Ma'at. These are the 7 principles they're referring to. And I know that some of you might have actually been confused between the 7 principles and the 42 negative confessions. And so when you look at that, we should understand the difference. They both refer to Ma'at. But I also want you to understand that when we talk about the origin of Ma'at, some of you are saying that Ma'at comes forward during the 42 negative confessions. That is a new kingdom derivation. Ancient Kemet's history is so long and so magnificent, brothers and sisters, that it lasts over 3,000 years, over 3 millennia. And so what historians do is they separate the history of ancient Kemet into 3 major sections: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. If I had more time, I'd talk to you about some of the differences in those periods that historians have rendered, but understand that we're talking about large swaths of time that occur in each of them. And so when you say that the 42 laws of Ma'at are come forward and you wonder why they're not as old as Kemet and maybe they came from somewhere else, you have to understand that the negative confessions were described in the New Kingdom, but Ma'at is ancient. Ma'at is ancient. We see her, the first real description of her, in that thing that is sometimes called, not the coffin text, I'm sorry, there's a misprint here, sometimes called the pyramid text, in the Mirkut of Unas, which was built during his reign at around 2378 or to 2348 BCE. We're talking about something that is over 4,000 years ago. This is where you first see Ma'at described. And in those texts we see, I have set Ma'at in it in the place of disorder. So he has set, Unas in this instance, has set Ma'at to actually defeat disorder. That's one of the reasons why we say Ma'at is the very stuff, the principle of the universe. He also says, now that I go forth today in the real form of a living Ak, a shining soul, I shall break up the fight and punish strife. I have come forth for Ma'at, so that I may bring her, she being with me. Now understand, we're talking about an individual who is now transformed into the divine. And so he is saying that Ma'at is with him. In fact, in order for you to become divine, you have to be Ma'akeru. And when you're Ma'akeru, you enter what is called the Hall of Ma'ati, which is in some ways, you can say in English, the place where people who are doubly of Ma'at, the place of people that are eternally Ma'at reside. So Ma'at is always described in this instance. I'm not going to read the rest of these quotes, but keep it just for time constraints, but understand that we see Ma'at in the Merkuti text. We also see her in the Old Kingdom during that wonderful book called the Maxims of Ptahhotep, the world's first complete book, the world's oldest complete book. And notice I'm saying complete. There is an older book, but it's also in Kemet. It's also in Kemet, but it is not complete. So the world's oldest complete book is called the Maxims of Ptahhotep. And it says, Ma'at is good and its worth is lasting. It has not been disturbed since the day of its creator, whereas he transgresses its ordinances is punished. It lies as a path in front even of him who knows nothing. Wrongdoing has never yet brought its venture to port. It is true that evil may gain wealth, but the strength of truth is that it lasts. A man can say, it was the property of my father. So this is one of the descriptions of Ma'at. And I'm going to tell you that this book, written by an elder at the time, who was at the age of 110, actually says that he is writing the entire book for his spiritual son. This is not a son that actually he gave birth to, that his queen gave birth to, his wife gave birth to. In actuality, this is a man who he is mentoring, and he wants him to live according to Ma'at. The entire book, all 37 maxims, deal with Ma'at. And I'm going to tell you that I have the wonderful honor of going to his tomb every year. I have the wonderful honor of seeing the statue, his life-size statue. In fact, for a very long time, you could find the Maxims of Ptahhotep, but you would not find his image. And let's be clear, his image is important because it shows you an African with dark skin, with a wide nose, with thick lips, an African that gives the world literature. And so I am honored to be able to go there. And I was one of the first people to begin putting his image online, because you could find his book anywhere, but you couldn't find his image. And I think that that's partially because it is certainly more difficult to argue that ancient Kemet is not an African civilization when you don't see the images of our ancestors who did these amazing things. You also see Ma'at in the coffin text, which comes forward in the Middle Kingdom. I call these the Neb-Ankh texts because we didn't use the word coffin. And those people who were buried in them were called Neb-Ankh, the Lord or the creator of life. So that if you have dominion over those things that exist in your lifetime, then you are able to be buried and go into the Hall of Ma'ati. This begins around 2055 BCE. And one of the lines says, and this is said to Atum, the creator of all, he says, it is said to him, kiss your daughter Ma'at, put her to your nose that your heart may live. The heart of the creator of the universe is Ma'at. Ma'at is that deity that has no origin story. It is said, actually, that she exists when creation exists because she is the stuff of the universe. She is the order of the universe. In fact, take a look here. This is just a screenshot that I put together very recently from a Medu Neter dictionary. And you actually see here the glyphs that respond to Ma'at. You are going to see a rectangular base with a triangular front piece. And that is supposed to be the primordial mound. It is the mound by which the divine creator first created on top of the sacred waters, Na'un, to be able to create the rest of civilization. When the divine creator came forth, the divine creator perched on top of that mound to create the rest of the creation. And in fact, because we are in the shrine of Ma'at, you can actually see an image. This is our sacred image of Ma'at. And you'll actually see that she sits on a similar platform. In many ways, this is the platform that is sometimes called Ma'at. This is the platform that sets things straight. And so that is Ma'at. Understanding these principles is of critical importance to those who have interest in how this occurs. Now, I want you to understand, should I even go to this slide now? I'm very sensitive to the fact that Brother Lex takes issue with some of what I've done in his book. And my intent was never to insult him. My intent was never to degrade him. I do take issue with the scholarship of his book. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with me taking issue with the scholarship in his book. So I want to go here for a moment. Let's go here. In terms of how this is presented, let's see if I can show you a particular slide that will even help to tell the story even further. What I want to show you, man, if I could even find it, is an image of how old Ma'at may actually be. And I'm not actually finding the slide. Let me explain it to you. When you actually look at the origin of Ma'at, at the origin of ancient Kemet, in fact, what you will see is that there are earlier vessels that come forth. These earlier vessels actually have images of a divine being that is older than Kemetic civilization. It actually comes to us from a period that actually predates Kemet. Here's an image of it here. So as you look at it, I want you to recognize that this is prior to Kemet being a civilization. This is before Kemet comes forth. This is before the first king gives us ancient Kemet. And what you will see on this image is ostriches. So while we have no words on this pottery to tell us exactly what they're referencing, what you can see is that it seems like the ancient Kemetic people are connecting the ostrich with sacred principles. This is before Kemet comes into existence. These pieces of pottery may come forward as early as 3500 BCE. And so I want you to understand that Ma'at is very, very old. Why am I doing this? One of the reasons why I think it's important for me to do this is because I think ultimately when Zion Lex asks about the origin of Ma'at, what he's actually doing is he's trying to say that Ma'at must be coming from somewhere else. And he posits in his book that Ma'at, and in fact all of Kemetic civilization, comes forward from Sumer. He says that Sumer is older. And I want you to understand that Sumer is actually a contemporary of Kemet. Now, if you are actually simply looking at when Kemet unifies as a nation, then it is true that Sumer is older. That's absolutely true. But brothers and sisters, I want us to be students of history here. There were people living in the region in Kemet prior, and there were people living in the region that was called Sumer at the same time. When you look at the earliest point that you can date Sumer, you are not necessarily saying that the civilization in its highest point at Sumer exists. And that is what Brother Zion Lex does a lot. When you read his book, he conflates thousands of years in order to make an argument. And in fact, while I did not get a chance to deal with this in our prior conversation, I think that the lack of fundamental scholarship in his book is the reason why he's able to make arguments with no basis. When you come up with an argument in a scholarly setting, you describe why you are making the argument. You use sources. You describe how things that are written before, said before, spoken before, actually describe how your ideas come into being. You can't just simply say this is this because it looks like it. That's not scholarship. And I will argue to you that Brother Zion Lex has it looks alike scholarship. So he actually shows you some images that seem to look alike in his book. And he then says, well, this means that Sumer is older. By the way, he says that Sumerian boats are exactly the same as Kemetic boats. I'm not sure what he's looking at when he makes those comments, but here go images of Sumerian boats. And here go images of the oldest images of Kemetic boats. These are before Kemet actually is a literate society. This is actually before Sumer is a literate society. And you're going to see a divine feminine being with her hands raised here. You'll see a similar statue in the Brooklyn Museum. This lady is from the Naqada period. And these are some of the boats that come forward later. Can you see that they look very different? This is the world's oldest seaworthy boat. Older than anything found in Sumer. Older than anything found in the world. It's the world's oldest seaworthy boat. In fact, just recently, I believe in 2013, a scholar built a model and actually got all the way, I think, to Finland in one of these boats. It's actually sewn together rather than nailed together. And this boat is the solar boat of Khufu. It was found at the base of the Great Merkut. The other thing that he does, he says that the ziggurat is exactly the Kemetic structure. Now I'm going to tell you that here is the ziggurat, the oldest ziggurat in Sumer. The Tepe Sialak ziggurat. And it's believed that it may have been built around 300 BCE. But you have to understand that while it is a structure, there were structures in Kemet earlier than this. Take a look at the Perjet. Some of you are going to call this the mastaba. That's actually the Arabic term. Perjet is the term that our ancestors used. Perjet it means the house of eternity. This is the structure that he should be comparing it to. And when you look at the two, you can see that they're in different condition and that one is certainly much more magnificent than the other. He argues that the Kemetic pyramids, Merkuti, were actually a foreign innovation brought into Kemet. He argues that Kemetic civilization has its origin elsewhere, and he makes the supposition that it has its origin in Sumer. We'll take a look at this very quickly, family. The earliest burials in Kemet were sand pit burials. We would dig a hole, put our ancestor in the sand, and we would also include some of the artifacts that we believe they lived with, the items they should be buried with, and the items that would allow them to make the journey into the afterlife. When we covered them with sand, the sand actually was able to sahufy them. The sand actually took all of the moisture out of their body, and so their bodies would last into perpetuity. But this didn't work very well because the sand would actually shift and eventually blow away. And so that person would be open to the elements. Later, what your Kemetic ancestors did is they actually begin to build rock pit burials. So they would, instead of just leaving it with sand, they'd put rocks on top of it. The rocks don't blow away. But you know what does happen? In times when things are challenging, people would actually just pick up the rocks and take all of the magnificent things that your ancestor was buried with. So this was not a final form. Then you see the mastaba that we talked about. This is the mastaba, the Perjet. So it has a superstructure that was first made out of mud brick, and then it would tunnel down straight into the bedrock, sometimes quite a few feet, dozens of feet, and then they would bury their ancestor there. This is a much more secure structure. And then we see a wonderful African build a large Perjet that is built out of not mud brick, but stone. Then he actually builds 3 on top of it, and then extends those Perjet structures. So there are 6 magnificent structures out of stone. This is the world's first building in stone. Brothers and sisters, I'm telling you that if you live in a house in masonry, you need to, every day you walk in, pay homage to your African ancestor Imhotep for bringing this innovation to the world. This is sometimes called the step pyramid. This is the step Merkut. The step Merkut. And so this is what then leads to a wonderful African king by the name of Seneferu, who then tries to get to the flat-sided perfect Merkut. He builds one that doesn't work. Ends up having a bent structure to it. I don't have time. I'd like to go into why it's bent. But then we see him build another one that doesn't work properly. It falls apart. This is the Meidum Merkut. And then finally, he gets the structure right and builds the red Merkut. This wonderful being, Seneferu, builds 3 Merkuti, and then his son builds the great Merkut. Why am I going through this, brothers and sisters? If this science comes from elsewhere, why are we seeing the intermediate forms in Kemet? Obviously, this structure was developed in Kemet, and we see it's being developed according to the scientific method. That is what we see. In fact, if you want to look for other Merkuti, you're not going to find them in Sumer. You're not going to find them anywhere else. You're going to find them in Meroe. The other thing that Brother Zion does, take a look at this one. He shows in his book the Lamassu, and he says that it is an early version of the Sphinx, the Hieromakit statue. That picture in his book, brothers and sisters, actually is of a statue that was built in 721 BCE. The Great Merkut is at least 2500 BCE. If you use the Orthodox position, there's some people who say that it may be as old as 15,000 years old. So you can't just do look-alike scholarship and say, obviously, ancient Kemetic society comes from Sumer because we see something similar. The thing that we see in Sumer is almost 1,500 years younger. You can't do that if you're doing good scholarship. He then tries to say that Nimrod is Narmer in the Bible. I don't have time to go into this entirely. But this is Narmer. I made a trip, a sacred trip to London this year to see the very statue of this great African who comes forward and gives ancient Kemet its form. He also then says that, that the falcon Heru comes from Kemet. Look at this image in the city of Ashur from 3000 BCE. But instead, I wish you could see this better. You're actually seeing that this structure, this image, comes from an earlier source from Nubia. So Zion Lex would love you to get the impression that this is something that comes from another place. I'm going to go into this later. Here's the point. Here's the point here. You cannot then begin to try to describe Kemet as coming from Sumer. That doesn't make sense. But I even want to say to you, brothers and sisters, I have engaged in a dialogue that isn't even necessary. You know why? Because the Hebrew people didn't come from Sumer. Abraham, who was said to come from Chaldea, actually is not a historical character. And so you need to understand that there's no outside evidence of him. He's depicted with camels, by the way, which we know don't come for at least a millennium later into the region. You need to understand that this is sloppy scholarship. Take a look at the quote by Paula McNutt, which says that we know that Abraham today is not a historical character. We see the same thing with Moses. We see the same thing with Joshua. I'm not going to go through this all now, but here are the quotes. Here's one. I'm going to just read this quote and then be done. Here's a quote by Moore and Kelly in 2011, and they say, most histories of ancient Israel no longer consider information about the Egyptian sojourn, the Exodus, and the wilderness wanderings recoverable or even relevant to Israel's emergence. Most important is the fact that no clear extra-biblical evidence exists for any aspect of the Egyptian sojourn, Exodus, or wilderness wanderings. So as we look at some of the challenges that I have with Brother Zion Lex's scholarship, you've heard me say that it looks alike scholarship. And the challenge with that is that if you see two images and they look alike, it is probably correct for you to say there's some relationship. But what he does not do is he does not give you dates. If you get dates, you'll see how flimsy this scholarship is. Take a look at page 45 of his book. You'll actually see him describing the Sumerian Sphinx. By the way, for those of you who know history, you know that this form is not Sumerian. That form is Assyrian. But what he was counting on you not to know is any bit of history of the region. Any bit of history. By the way, you should know that I just did a tour on Sunday of the location where this comes from. I took a picture in front of it, but I didn't have time to put it in. I didn't take a picture in front of it because I have respect for this image. I took a picture in front of it because I wanted you to know that that's the kind of research I do. You have to go to the site and actually become experienced with the artifacts. So on page 45, I don't know if you can see that there, family, he shows you the image and he's talking about how the Sphinx comes from Sumeria, but then he shows you something Assyrian. Why? Because he has conflated thousands of years. If Sumer is a nation in 4000 BCE, and he shows you something from 721 BCE to 705 BCE, you should ask yourself, family, are those two things connected? But that's why he didn't give you the dates, because he's making a faulty argument with faulty sources and poor pictures. This is why I got into the problem of the type of scholarship he has. And I know that some of you are saying Jabari's an agent. He went and he spoke to someone about the text. By the way, I want you to be really clear that when I spoke to someone about his book, I didn't tell them his name. I didn't give them the name of the book. And I also didn't even give the person my name. I spoke to them anonymously to ask whether the pictures in this book had been released. And they clearly said to me no. Now, you know that they asked me lots of questions after that. You know they did. And you might even think, well, couldn't they just call you back? Not if you block your number. I'm trying to tell you I went to great extents not to put this brother out. Now, some of you are upset that I did it in public. And the only reason why you're upset about it is because you're not familiar with how scholarly vetting takes place. If you were in the university that I went to, Cornell University, and you put something forward like this, everyone would address it in a scholarly forum. I wouldn't then get upset if I did this and say, I didn't want him to know that I could have taken this another way and I didn't want to disrespect his house. That's what he did, implying that we could have actually gone to some physical violence, talking about the fact that I don't know him, that he's actually from the streets. Well, brothers and sisters, please don't let the glasses fool you. We are both black men that had to come up the hard way. And I'm telling you that even though I'm a Kemetic priest, I would always be able to equate myself physically. I would never want to do that, because as much as I disagree with him, Brother Zion Lex is my brother. These debates are about ideology and concepts. Why would I want to engage in physical violence over that? That's not the kind of person I am, and that's not the kind of tradition I come from. Because ultimately, regardless of what we talk about here, if your tradition is not making you a better person, if your tradition is not assisting you with developing better character, if your tradition is not helping you understand how you should interact with your brothers, then you should find a new tradition. And so this is where we have to go. So you're seeing the Lamassu, and you're seeing the Herumakot. And the Herumakot is at least from 2500 BCE, at least, if not older. And so you have to understand we're talking about the difference of at least 1300 years. You can't compare those. If anything, then your argument goes the other way. That this divine beast, the Herumakot, I won't call it the Sphinx, only for those of you who are not familiar with its African name, influenced the Lamassu. You can't do that in your book and then just pretend that it's the same thing. He also attempts to say that perhaps Nimrod is Asar. Okay, don't listen to Brother Jabari, because I know some of you are like, you know, this Kemetic bald dude is telling me about my tradition. Don't listen to me. Let's listen to what Levin Yagal says in 2002. He says, the biblical Nimrod then is not a total counterpart of any one historical character. He is rather the composite equivalent of the Sargonid dynasty, the first Mardi king to rule after the flood. Later influence modified the legend in the Mesopotamian tradition, adding such details as the hero's name, his territory, and some of his deeds. The most important, his title, King of Kish. Later editors of the book of Genesis dropped much of this story and mistakenly identified the Mesopotamian Kish with the Hamitic Cush. Brother Zion Lex is going to try to tell you that Nimrod is possibly a Sar. But he can only do that if you're not reading for yourself, family. He can only do that if he's not going to cite his sources. He can only do that if he's going to attempt to give you an argument that sounds good and looks good with look-alike scholarship, but does not bear the test of true scholarship. This is Narmer, the first king of Kemet. This is who this brother is. And he tells you he comes from the south. He doesn't tell you he comes from Sumer. There's no scholar worth their weight that would argue that Kemet has its origins outside of Africa. You'd have to really look hard for some Europeans that are trying to sell books but are not doing scholarship. I'm telling you that the Tomhu, the European, doesn't even agree with that anymore. So if you're about to hear that from Brother Zion Lex, ask him what he's reading. Ask him how challenging he's reading it. And if he starts showing you images of books, tell him to cite what it says in the books that agrees with him, because I know he won't do that. And there I am in the British Museum in March. I searched for this image and I needed to see it for myself. This is scholarship. I need to research the piece, find where it was. And as you also see, because I'm not just a historian, I'm a priest, I'm paying homage to my scholar. You see my face, how I'm cheesing? I was ecstatic. I've been studying Narmer for nearly 30 years now. And now I'm seeing his image. Here again, you're going to hear that the falcon in the Sumerian tradition is Heru. I don't have the time. Family, if you've read his book, I think what you should do is look for the pictures. Just look for the picture. And you're going to see the number of times that he tries to say that the falcon that is in Kemet is actually taken from Sumer. He's going to talk to you about Ashur, the deified city of Ashur. The city comes from 3000 BCE. That doesn't mean that all of this development comes from 3000 BCE. Just because people set foot on a land doesn't mean that these images come from that period. Ask him when they come from so that he can challenge you, so he can be challenged with it. And take a look at Heru on the left here. That's the Kemetic deity, but I want you to understand that I just came back from Chicago. I did a tour of the Oriental Institute, and one of the reasons why I do tours of the Oriental Institute is because I need to see the Kustal incense burner. I'm sure that Brother Zion, unless he's looked at my videos, does not know anything about the Kustal incense burner, because none of the European scholars will talk to you about it. Why? Because the Kustal incense burner proves the African origin of Kemet. It proves to us that Kemet comes from the south. That actually, that place that most people today know as Nubia, which actually should be called Kush, is the foreparent of Kemet. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying that Kush was as intricate or as comprehensive or as powerful a society as Kemet. This is almost a situation where the parent gives much to the child and the child goes on to do amazing things that the parent only wished they could do. But this is where the origin of Kemet comes from. And take a look at the Kustal incense burner. You will see a king with the white crown of Upper Kemet and a falcon in front of him in the symbol of the Serek, the earliest version of that symbol that sometimes you hear as a cartouche. Now, family, I want you to understand that the imagery of ancient Kemet is found on the Custal incense burner, and the Custal incense burner was found in tombs of the world's earliest dynasty, the world's earliest royal family, and that family was found in Nubia, in Kush. This is before Narmer puts Kemet together. So we know that the culture is coming actually up the Hapi, up the Nile. By the way, if you're unclear about this, why did Kemetic rulers continue to send expeditions into the interior of Africa to their homeland, and the place that we often call Punt today, that perhaps should be called Puanit? So anyway, I'm gonna close here as best I can so that I'm able to then deal a bit further with Brother Zion. One of the things that I may talk about briefly is the fact that the patriarchs of Kemet, the patriarchs of the biblical tradition, of the Jewish tradition, are actually not historical characters. Lex is going to try to tell you that ancient Kemet comes from Sumer. First of all, we know that that's not true. And second of all, you should also understand that the Hebrew people don't come from Sumer either. I would like to see Brother Zion Lex deal with this. With that, I'm going to cede the floor to my brother Zion Lex, who I come to in respect. We disagree on ideas. This is not a situation where I have any enmity for him. This is not a situation where I hate him or dislike him. We're disagreeing on ideas. I think these ideas are fundamental to where black people need to go, but this is going to be a brotherly debate. So, without further ado, I will cede the ground to my brother, Zion Lex. Thank you.
Are we ready?
We ready?
Let's go. Time is running.
Y'all ready?
Tear him up, man.
All right, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. So we here live on Sonetta TV, of which we finally have the opportunity to see one another face to face. Now, I heard Jabari come up here and say that there were rumors that Zion Lex was running. I want to know where he getting his information from. There were rumors that Jabari was running. I don't know where that information is coming from. I know that's how I feel, but I want to know where the information is coming from. So here's what we're dealing with. The topic of the discussion today is the origins of Ma'at. Anyone who watched the previous dialogue between myself and Brother Jabari, we all know that one of the main features that I brought out during the dialogue was I questioned or I cross-examined him on the origins of Ma'at. So I want to read the title of my presentation, which is entitled Zion Lex Cross-Examines Jabari on the Origins of Ma'at. The case for plagiarism examined in context. Why is this so important? Brother Jabari is on video saying that the Ten Commandments, which represents the legal code of the Torah, is a plagiarization of the legal code in Kemet, the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at. This poses a problem for Brother Jabari because one of the first things that we have to deal with when we talk about plagiarization, we have to first establish authorship. After I questioned Jabari meticulously on the origins of Ma'at, he then had a sit-down with Captain Tazariak, where Captain Tazariak followed up with a series of the same questions. Jabari even noted during that dialogue that perhaps my brother, our brother, Captain Tazariak, may have been moved to ask those questions based on my recent dialogue, which Brother Tazariak confirmed for me recently when we had a dialogue. He had no problem admitting that. With that being stated, Brother Jabari now goes back on Sonetta TV, and I believe it was from his home because it's the pictures of Ma'at that he's showing. And he went back and he says, you see, Captain Tazariak asked me a question, and I believe that the fervor or the desire for that question perhaps came from my dialogue with Zion Lex, where Zion Lex asked me to describe the origins of Ma'at. Then Brother Jabari says, Ma'at has no origins. We see Ma'at as the very stuff of the universe. We see Ma'at as existing before the universe ever came into existence. So we don't have a concept of the origins of Ma'at itself. What I believe Brother Zion Lex wants to talk about is who first described Ma'at. Let me quote him verbatim. I believe that Brother Zion Lex really wants to ask, well, who was the first one? And he turns around, he looks at the camera and says, we don't know, family. We honestly don't know. Here's the problem we have, Brother Jabari. I don't have a problem with Ma'at not having an origin. That's fine. But when you cannot tell me who was the first person to introduce Ma'at into Kemet, that means you on record acknowledging that you don't know who the author of Ma'at is in terms of introducing it to a people or a civilization. And we cannot hop, skip, and jump to conclusions that Kemet is the author of Ma'at when you yourself are on camera saying, family, we do not know. Everyone saw the video. I played it live, and we're going to play it again a little later. Here we go. So the case for plagiarization is knocked out in the first round because when we talk about plagiarization, the first thing that has to be proved is authorship. If Jabari can get before the world and tell the people he does not know who was the first person to describe Ma'at, guess what? From the perspective of authorship, he does not know who the author is. Guess what? You have no claims to plagiarization if you cannot tell us who the author is. So we're going to deal with something real quick. Everybody talks about Ma'at, but the bottom line is a lot of people don't know what they're talking about. And for those of us who try to approach scholarship in a genuine way, we kind of want to look to people who understand what Ma'at is. So I would look at a person like Brother Jabari, who certainly has studied enough to be able to tell us that. I would look at somebody like Brother Reggie. I might even look at Shaka Amos. But because I also believe in going out and doing research of my own, that's exactly what I did. So we know that the term Ma'at, with that T sound, which would be that bread loaf, which acts as a suffix at the end of a word, making a word feminine in the Kemetic tongue and language, the Medu Neter. We know that that's not the earliest representation of the actual name in Kemet. We know that the earliest representation, as we see it carved in the pyramid text, is actually Ma'ah, which would then not make it feminine in origin. You see, what a lot of people don't realize when we jump to conclusions and we act as if we are the rod stick by which truth is measured, we say Ma'at must be a woman because she is always personified as a woman. Well, I ask anyone to go on Assata Shakur's website. I don't think I have to explain who Assata Shakur is. She has a dialogue with a brother who's been studying Medu Neter over 35 years. And this brother goes into it very deep. And what he revealed in the dialogue is that there's actually a male counterpart to Ma'at, known as Ma'ah. And in the Coptic tongue, it is pronounced Me. Now, here's a question. Brother Jabari, like many of those in the Kemetic community, always stressed the idea that the Kemetic or African spiritual system is matrilineal. And when he looks at the divine legal code or sacred spiritual system in Kemet, he always takes preference or difference to highlight or exemplify Ma'at, the feminine. But Ma'at also represents balance. Why not also talk about the male counterpart? These are questions that I want you to get into your mind. I'm actually not even going to tackle it in full because myself and Jabari have a debate December 17th that we would like people to come to. So I'm just giving you a teaser right now. So Ma'at represents truth, justice, reciprocity, righteousness. Let's move on.
You forgot balance.
No, I didn't forget balance. We said that already.
Harmony.
Remember?
Order.
Harmony is balance, brother. Let's move on. If we can. So everybody remembers this dialogue. Oh, I think this is ludicrous, Zion Lex. Why would you even say that? The 42 negative confessions of Ma'at, the legal code of Ma'at, is a self-incriminating evidence of a much earlier legal code from which it comes from. What do you mean by that? Zion Lex swear he's smart. The negative confessions of Ma'at is evidence of a much earlier legal code which Kemet borrowed from. The 42 negative confessions is a third-party testimony. By third party, let me explain. What is Zion Lex talking about? Third-party confessions. Does Zion Lex even understand in context what third party means? Well, let's break it down for Brother Jabari and those who may not understand what Zion Lex said. You see, in a court of law, the person who is making a claim, such as the prosecution side, that's the first party. The person who is adjudicating the claim, what the claim is being judged by would be the judge. You, as the claimant coming in, you're the third party. They see people all day, every day. So you are not primary. The primary people is the prosecutor and the judge. You coming in for your claim, you represent the third party because you are not the primal focus here. They see people all day, every day. So let's bring it back to Kemet now. In Kemet, what do we have? We have the 42 negative confessions of Ma'at. Okay. Ma'at represents what? The body by which these truths are measured by, and we are what? Supposed to what? Live by. Now, what a lot of people may not realize is that when you go before what is known as the Hall of Ma'ati, you approach 42 halls or 42 gates, which are known as the 42 assessors of Ma'at. Each one of these halls or gates, you will encounter a deity with a lowercase d. What do I mean by that? Well, you got to open up chapter 125 in the Per Em Heru, the book of the coming forth by day, because then you'll see that there are 42 assessors by which the person who is going through the hall has to actually encounter through successive stages before he gets to where he is judged. Now, this is very, very important because if you notice the parallel that I gave earlier, you're seeing the same thing. The law is coming from Ma'at. You are being judged and tried by the 42 assessors. You have to pronounce your what? Your innocence. And you represent the third party. So as I said, by third party, I mean that the law comes from Ma'at. The negative confessions must be confessed before the 42 assessors of Ma'at, which represents the second party, and the individual confessing represents the third party. The negative confessions cannot represent the original legal code because the original legal code is spoken from the Netcher to the man, while the negative confessions represents the opposite. What do we mean by that? Let's revisit that again. Very, very powerful point that Brother Jabari, as clergy and as a trained professor in a Western-styled university, and we know how that goes, he was able to bob and weave that like it wasn't a body shot. He was able to bob and weave that like it wasn't a powerful chin check. But if you notice, his response lets you know it was a body shot and it was a powerful chin check because he completely brushed it off without dealing with it. In fact, he went on a previous follow-up video and says, and the response for that, you got to wait for it. You're going to love it, of which he just gave earlier, and we're going to revisit just now. I'm going to murder that response. But here we go. Brother Jabari, he seems to believe that somehow, some way, because a person is deemed Asar once he passes the hall of innocence, once he passes the hall of Ma'ati, that somehow, some way, that makes the statement of it being a negative confession equivalent to the person being a Netcher himself. But Brother Jabari must think that no one else has read the Per Em Heru but him. Brother Jabari must believe that none of us have eyes to see but him. Because in the Per Em Heru, we find statements like Netcher, Netcheru, which would be equivalent to deity of deities, or some people would say God of gods, or some people would say principle of principles. In the Kemetic tongue and language, there's a difference made between a singular force and a plurality of forces. The singular force would be Netcher. And depending upon the period in Kemet that you're looking at, it could be Enter, Netter, Nedger. You see this throughout the system. I would point people towards Baba Heru, who's on video making those distinctions. I would point people out to Mfudiji, who would tell you, based on the period that you're looking at, and of course, when you go back to the furthest, Mfudiji would tell you that the proper pronunciation in the Old Kingdom for Netter would actually be Netcher, with a N-E-T-J-E-R or N-E-J-E-R. This is very important as we get to my later slides. But the point that I want to leave here, and why I'm taking so much time focusing, I want you to realize something that I pointed out that was powerful. To say that I have not robbed my brother, to say that I have not cursed the gods, what that represents is an attestation to not being against or in violation of a divine legal code. And by divine, I mean we talk about netures here. We talk about neteru here. Even Ma'at, in one of the 42 confessions, is one of the people that you go before. And she is certainly considered a neture. So with that being said, we have to ask a question. Every time someone goes before the hall of Ma'at and they confess before the 42 assessors that I have not violated this legal code, I have to ask you a question. How does this person know what is a violation of a legal code? None of us were born in the womb knowing all 42 violations that are pronounced in the negative confessions of Ma'at. I haven't found that written in Kemet nowhere, where people automatically knew what this was. But guess what? Common sense would tell you. For people to be going up talking about I have not robbed my brother, negatively confessing, they are going by a document from which this comes from. That is common sense, and apparently that's not so common. Let me move on to my next slide, because we're going to get dangerous with this when we get to the actual debate. Now, I don't like to do tit for tat. People in my community know me not to be a tit for tat personality. But I was engaging an individual by the name of Brother Jabari Ozaze, who is supposed to be having a dialogue with me about the origins of civilization. And he chose to bring up a number of images in my book which he felt I did not have permission to take. And then he even said to me, well, don't feel bad. This is how scholarship works. I have every right to critique your work on this level. So, I went back to the drawing board trying to figure out why my brother, who introduced himself as such, would actually deal with the owner of a blog about a situation in my book before he talks to me. And I say, you know what, let me order his book, because you know what, maybe I could learn something from him. The brother says he is a teacher, and I am not so proud that I can't learn from others. So if I'm to learn how scholarship works, I should also probably take his advice and purchase his book, which I actually did. I purchased a book entitled 7 Little White Lies. In page 67, Brother Jabari has a picture from the gods of Egypt, and I want to make this extremely clear. The picture is heavily cited. And I also want to make this extremely clear. The majority of the work in his book is extremely cited. But I also want to make this clear. Because something is cited doesn't mean you had permission to publish it. So Brother Jabari has a picture from a 2016 film entitled God of Egypt. He has a screenshot. He even tells you in the caption below the picture, it's a screenshot from the movie Gods of Egypt. So I said, hold on. I know a thing or two about movie and film production. After all, one of my closest friends, shout out to my brother Shaka, is a filmmaker. He actually won an award at the International Film Festival 2 years ago. He actually did an interview on The Breakfast Club last year. And me and him have dialogued for years. I remember when him and my cousin interviewed Russell Simmons a couple years ago. And I learned a thing or two from him. He's actually one of the people that helped me to get into book writing. And one of the things that I know and understand about entering a screenshot from a movie film, let's look at it right now. How long does copyright exist? These are copyright laws for still images and motion pictures. We are defining the limitations of free use. Brother Jabari scratching his head. Here we go. Now, a photograph would be considered a still image. The movie would be considered a moving image, or i.e. a motion picture. Sound bites, sound recordings, we understand that. Now I want to point this out. A major blockbuster film produced by Lionsgate Films, such as Gods of Egypt, certainly has a copyright. If I need to explain to you why and how they have a copyright, we shouldn't even be having a dialogue. With that being said, Let's first look at the copyright duration for a still picture, a photograph. To the end of the 50th year from the making of the original initial negative. Now, this is just a regular picture. This does not include pictures that are used in books necessarily. This is just a photographer. You may have found his work somewhere on the street. We're talking about the duration period for photographs or still images. Now, let's look at movies. To the end of the 50th year from the first publication, and if not published, 50 years from the making of the film. Let me say it again. We're looking at movies now, of which Gods of Egypt is a movie. It says to the end of the 50th year from the publication date. That movie was published in 2016. Jabari wrote his book in, I believe, March of 2017. That means it is not 50 years from the date of the publication of the movie. So I have a question, Brother Jabari Ozaze. Why pick on Zion Lex's admitted pamphlet when you yourself are on record saying that this is not how we approach scholarship? Why would you take from an image of a blog owner and not get permission? I have a question for you, Brother Jabari. Do you have permission from Lionsgate Film to use this image in your book? And if so, can you present in writing, which is what it would have to be in, because anytime you get permission from an entity such as Lionsgate or a Blockbuster Film, or permission in general with a legal matter, it has to be in writing. So we would want my brother to do the honorable thing by exonerating himself and showing the people that he actually has in writing from Lionsgate that he's allowed to use a screen capture in his book. That haphazardly or ironically is for profit, because the last time I checked, I had to pay a little bit under $20 to order my brother's book. But I want to say something, and I want to say something very, very genuine and make something clear. What I elected to do is quite different from what my brother elected to do. You see, the issue that I have with my brother, I first talked with the brother about, because as those closest to me know, I actually felt unsettled going into Jabari's book to discuss this particular issue. Because after purchasing Jabari's book and reading Jabari's book, I want to make something clear. Zion Lex is not a biased individual. I actually recommend people to go out and buy 7 Little White Lies. And that's not hard for me to do. What Jabari achieves successfully in that book is he destroys European images of ancient African civilizations, something that must be done. So I congratulate Jabari for doing that. My only gripe, my only critique is for Jabari is this. If you have an issue with me about using an image of which I had no permission for according to you, which you still haven't proved, so I say according to you, then I have a question, Brother Jabari. Why would you use a screen capture from a movie produced last year when we see right here you need at least 50 years? Or if you did get permission, which by the way, family, you actually can get permission for this particular image, this particular movie right here, but it has to be in writing. And the writing, more importantly, would actually also come with a date. So when Jabari provides the writing, which I hope he will, because ultimately he should get permission because it is in his book. This is good advice from me to a brother. It will still have the date on it. And the date is going to show that if he got the permission after the book was published, then we know why he took a lesson out of Zion Lex's book. Now let's move forward. Because unlike the dishonest and disingenuous way we're dealing information, that will not consist of the criteria or the bulk of my information at all. I don't want to skip these things. Let me go over them really quick. Racist attribution of said proponents. Racist proponents rejected. When people tackle my book, such as Brother Garfield pointed out that Zion Lex is using racist sources, blah, blah, blah. Even Jabari questioned the veracity of my sources. He didn't actually go the racist route, because even he has enough sense to know, listen, Most Europeans that have looked at African history have saw their picture in it, or envisaged to see their picture in it. So Jabari has enough common sense to know that, listen, people, here's the honest truth. You have scholars out there in the black and white community who write books based on information that they go out, see, observe, and record. Many of them in the European community will maliciously paint their faces into those societies and civilizations. But we still have to ask a question. Does that discredit or negate the scholarship they shared in the book? With regard to them talking about painting themselves into the picture, we know that they have no justification for doing so. But are we to reject the book simply because a white man wrote it? Because if that's the case, y'all have to throw out Dr. Ben's book, Dr. John Henry Clarke's book. All of these men quoted individuals primarily like Gerald Massey, who, by the way, before any Afrocentric author wrote a book about the parallelisms between the Bible and Kemet, Gerald Massey was the first to do so. But I won't talk about that in depth right now. More on that during the debate. But I want you to see that in my book, in page 2, first chapter, I actually tell the people that the proponents of the dynastic race theory were racist. I'm not trying to hide it. Let's read it. Another reason why the dynastic theory was rejected, particularly in African scholastic circles, is because the proponents of this theory began to introduce European civilization into the pre-dynastic civilization by whitewashing the Asiatics, who we know to be a people of a color, such as the Sumerians who call themselves Sagiga, the blackheads, and even going so far as to state that the Greeks and original inhabitants of Asia Minor, i.e. Europeans, contributed to pre-dynastic Egyptian culture. I do not support this last conclusion, simply because racism was at the epicenter of it, and the desire to promote the supremacy of European culture by making it the precursor of African culture, when both history and archaeology disagrees with such an unfounded claim. All right, so I already showed you that, number one, I'm transparent. In my book, page 2, chapter 1, I'm telling you that the proponents of the dynastic theory, many of them were racist in origin. But I'm also reminding you that many of the individuals who look at classical civilizations, such as Sumer and Kemet, and even obviously the Hebrews, they all have whitewashed them. And we all agree that none of these people were originally European. I haven't even encountered anyone genuine in the Kemetic community that will tell me that the original Hebrews were European. We have enough common sense, and I want to assume lack of hatred to go so far. Shout out to Brother Garfield. But what I want to make clear is I'm transparent. It's in my book. So I'm not hiding who the proponents are. Now, I was also told Zion Lex is using outdated information. Where is he going with the dynastic race theory? Flinders Petrie is dead how many years? Introducing Michael Rice, who wrote a book entitled Egypt's Making, a contemporary proponent of the dynastic race theory. Introducing David Rohl, who wrote a book, and more on that during the debate. Legend, The Genesis of Egyptian Civilization, a contemporary proponent of the dynastic race theory. Now, here comes, as the Kemetic people would say in their own language, the daddy of the Kemetic community. What? Here he is right here. We always talk about how great the Grand Master Teachers was. Here's your daddy. And what do I mean by that? Every single quote-unquote Grandmaster teacher in the Kemetic community quoted the works of Gerald Massey. Every single last one of them. Gerald Massey, there's a lot that you need to understand about the mind of this man. Number one, he was a Druid priest that believes in satanic ritual. There's a lot of things that is about him that would want to question, why are we looking at him? But then we kind of fall back into the whole, yeah, Zion, but you know, the person who wrote your book is racist, you know, so don't do that, blah, blah, blah. I don't have a problem. What I do have a problem with is called hypocrisy. Zion Lex is quoting Europeans when he makes his statements on Sumer. Every Kemetic scholar, every single Grandmaster teacher who has written a book in the Kemetic community, and I emphasize written a book, has quoted the works of Gerald Massey. And they make him a viable source on the parallelisms between the Bible and Kemet. And before any Grandmaster teacher in the Kemetic community penned any book on those ideas, he did. And they all quote him in their works, and they all freely say that they referenced him to make those ideas. That means, at the end of the day, the very same Afrocentric scholars who push the narrative that Kemet is the author of civilization, they all got it from this white guy who not only believed that, but he also believed that the ancient Kemetics were European also. So we need to point that out as well. All I ask people to do is be genuine and be honest. That's all I ask. I don't think that's too hard. The Invention of Racism in Classical Antiquity. Here's a book that you need to look at really quick. This book lets you know that the pen of a person called Tacitus is the origin of racism in the old world, and it then makes its way into the new world in the form of books like Eugenics. In fact, the author of Eugenics quotes Tacitus's work, Germania, where he speaks about racism based on geographical location, where Tacitus, the Roman historian, says that if you live in hot, dry areas, you tend to be lazy and lack intellectual skill set. And he says that if you live in cold areas, then you tend to be wise and you tend to be robust in size because you have to be a hunter. These are your founding fathers of quote-unquote Egyptology. I have brought this out several times. And what do I mean by that? Before we see any single Afrocentric author pen a single book on Kemet, we see these works circulating. And we also see that the words of James Henry Bested, E.A. Wallace Budge, Flinders Petrie, and Samuel Birch were heavily quoted by them, which means that the narrative of Kemet, as I'm beginning to show you a pattern, is heavily produced and pushed initially or first by European scholars. We must understand the reason for that. More on that during the debate. Stolen Legacy, based by George G.M. James, who I respect highly, based heavily on the works of Gerald Massey. What do I mean heavily? Look at the back of the book, the bibliography. Look how many times he quotes Gerald Massey. Then you'll understand what I mean by based heavily on the works of Gerald Massey. This is my brother right here. Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. You know, I had a question for Brother Jabari that I didn't get to ask. This question was going to be, when is the first emergence of Asiatics in Kemet? I hopefully want to see his answer. But I could tell you what Chancellor Williams says. In page 63, as early as the end of the 4th millennia BC, and even before the first dynasty in Egypt, there are records of a great African victory over the Asians in the north. The Palermo stone records victory after victory over the Asians. Finally, the great triumph came when African King Menes defeated the Asians decisively and united all Egypt under African rule. He makes it clear that in order to unite Kemet, he had to defeat the Asiatics who were in control of it. This is very important to note, because you have scholars like Shaka Amos, you have scholars like Brother Reggie that tell you, and I was curious to see Jabari's response, and hopefully now he'll build a narrative behind what I said. All those other brothers, they say, the earliest emergence of Asiatics in Kemet is the Hyksos. Well, I know of a master teacher by the name, blessed be his memory, of Chancellor Williams. And he says on page 63, King Menes, who's considered the first pharaoh of Kemet, he had to defeat the Asiatics who controlled Kemet. Look at Soneta's face. I wish the camera was on him.
I'm just like this.
Menes,
You trying to make it look like
Ethiopian king of kings. This is an image. I was able to allow the brother to do his thing without talking in the background. But Menes, the Ethiopian king of kings, led his army on Nile fleet to retake northern Ethiopia from the Asians. He even, and by he I'm referring to Chancellor Williams in his book, he even provides an image of you, an image for you, of the same boats Jabari criticized me for using in the previous lecture. He says Zion Lex is going to show you boats of Sumerians and then show you boats in Kemet and say, oh, you see, this is from Sumeria. Zion Lex has look-like scholarship. When we all just watch Brother Jabari look at a vase and tell you because it has an ostrich on it that this is the origins of Ma'at. And he doesn't give you a single citation for it, but he tells you the origins of Ma'at. Then he tells the community that Zion Lex has look-like scholarship. What I've been pointing out so far, as you see a pattern, is the hypocrisy. But we see Chancellor Williams tells you that in order for Menes, the Ethiopian king of kings, to do what? Come from Ethiopia, from the Asians in Lower Egypt, in order to found the first dynasty, who did they have to defeat? The Asians that were protecting it. Now, Brother Jabari, who I could put on trial in this instance, says, the Bible is not a historical book. Let's go back to this master teacher and look at his picture again. Dr. Chancellor Williams. Last time I checked, Jabari is not a doctor yet. What does Chancellor Williams say about the historical reliability of the Bible? He says first, Petrie headed a line of investigators and writers without whose works the word will be intellectually poorer. Listen to this, it's extremely important. Chancellor Williams says on page 363, Petrie headed a line of investigators and writers without whose works the world would be intellectually poorer. So the individuals that are following this quotation, Chancellor Williams says without their works the world would be intellectually poorer. Let's see who he names. James Hesry Bested. He's naming Europeans, by the way. He actually begins with Europeans because, as I told you, Europeans in this country were the founding fathers of Egyptology. Budge, Africanus, Bake, Boas, Delphos, Garstan, Griffith, Nims, and others. The illustrious roll is long. Then he goes on to say something I really admire. The Bible is one of our richest sources for many different sidelights on the black world. Why don't the Kemetic scholars be honest enough to say that? Why don't the Kemetic scholars be honest enough to admit that you can open the Torah and find Aboriginal terms like Cush? Which, by the way, Nubia is much more recent, and Nubia is more of an exploitative term, because the Cushites didn't call themselves the people of gold, of which Kemet exploited them for. They call themselves the people of Cush. Chancellor Williams, the Bible is one of our richest sources for many sidelights in the black world. This is how scholarship works, by the way. The gods of the Egyptians. Now, time out. Chancellor Williams just says, without the work, Petrie headed a line of investigators and writers, without whose works the world would be intellectually poorer, and he names Budge. Chancellor Williams says in page 363 of his book, without the works of a person named Budge, among others, the world would be intellectually poor. Let's see what Budge says. In Budge's book, The Gods of the Egyptians, page 290, he says, there is every possibility that the Sumerian system was taken into Egypt by the same people who carried into the country the art of making bricks and the use of the cylinder seal. Egypt's Legacy by Michael Rice. The main influx of new people into the valley began around 6000 BC, page 70. The late pre-dynastic period is marked by heavy foreign influence, namely Southwest Asia, Sumer and Elam, ideas and symbols hitherto foreign to Kemet, page 75. I have to run right now. In Egypt's Legacy, Michael Rice, the master of animal scenes, page 77, depicted on the Gebel El Arak knife, depicted a heroic figure dressed as late 4th century BCE Mesopotamian and who was the least bit Egyptian. So parpards and cylinder seals which originated in Elam, page 77. High proud ships, the same ones Jabari criticized me for, as if I'm the founder of this idea, as if everything that I've put forth came from my mind alone and I'm pseudo. High proud ships, unlike Egyptian vessels. The Egyptian temple palace facade, something he mentioned, adjacent to the king's name, all come from where? Sumer, page 77. And it's called a Serek in Sumer as well. But here we go. More on that during the debate. Brother Jabari, upon, how much time I have?
2:10.
Thank you. Brother Jabari, upon accepting my invitation to another dialogue, he says, you know, among some of the things that I want to address, Brother Zion, is, you know, some of your parallelisms to Nimrod and Asar, you know, I got to address it. Okay. So Brother Jabari is used to reading the King James Bible, but, you know, we actually read Hebrew. And those who read the Per Em Heru in the Kemetic tongue would understand there's a difference between reading the Kemetic tongue and the English. So that's why we do it. We don't do it to run clocks. It's called scholarship, by the way. From that land went forth Nimrod. Uh-oh. Genesis chapter 10, verse 11, in the original Hebrew, says, Min ara hahu nipach Nimrod, umelech Be'ot, Wedal. From that land went forth Nimrod and reigned in Athor, because in Aramaic, Ashur is Athor. So we have here a correlation in the Hebrew text between the name Nimrod and Ashur, or Asar. Many of us who study Sumerian tongue, the Sumerian lexicon, we know that the letter Shin in both Sumerian, Ugaritic, and Hebrew is interchangeable with the letter Sin. So Nimrod is called Ashur in the Torah by the Hebrews, but the Sumerians actually called him Asar. Nimrod is also known as Asar. In describing the cities built by Nimrod, the Torah says, Genesis chapter 10:11, and Ashur went forth and built Nineveh. Why does the Torah call Nimrod Ashur? When the Sumerians read this, they read it as Asar. But we have Asar and Kemet. More on that in the debate, because I have to obviously rush. The Sumerian legal code. The legal code in Sumerian literature is referred to as Me, pronounced Me. They number approximately 282 in number, which is the amount of all the laws, ironically, Israelites can keep within the 613 laws, regardless of gender, political status, i.e. king, or spiritual status, i.e. priest. What do we mean by that? Not all 613 laws can be kept by one person. Some laws apply to kings, some laws apply to priests, some laws apply to women. But at all times, there are exactly a number of 282 laws in the Torah that apply to everyone alike in the nation of Israel. Well, ironically, we see the same thing in Sumer. This is genuine parallelism, not looking at, I have not robbed. The Hebrews say, don't steal. See? We can't take universal concepts and claim authorship to it. We can't take universal concepts and put our stamp on it. It's universal. Thou shalt not kill is universal. Why we even have to explain that? This I'm going to skip because that's going to be bad, but I will end right here. Brother Jabari said on camera and tonight, the teachings of Ptah Hotep is the oldest complete book. What is he even talking about? Let's look at this. The maxims of Ptah Hotep represent proverbial writings and moral edicts from a king to his son, instructing him on how to be perfect in accordance with divine law. It is rightly attested to the 12th dynasty, the complete copy, because as I explained to Jabari on the phone, we only see fragments of the maxims of Ptah Hotep in 2350 BCE, or let's even stretch it to 2500 BCE, whichever you want to take. But going on Jabari's own words, the oldest complete copy is actually the 12th dynasty. So how would that be the oldest complete copy when the instructions of Shurupak outdate the oldest date, which is the fragmented date, which is 2350 BC or 2500 BC, and the instructions of Shurupak date to 2600 BCE. I'll stop right there.
Peace, family. I want to thank Brother Zion Lex for a spirited presentation. I really do believe that this is the presentation he should have given the first time. I enjoyed his presentation. I think there's a lot that we're going to agree and disagree on. And I think that if you listen carefully, you're going to find that much of what he described has nothing to do with this discussion. Has nothing to do with this discussion. We are talking about the origins of Ma'at. He covered that very briefly, of what he sees, and I'm going to address that very quickly. And we also are attempting to describe each other's scholarship in a way that hopefully will help you understand that there may be some challenges with it, and thereby challenges with the ideas that we're presenting you here today. So that's part of what we did. First of all, right off the bat, I want to address what Brother Zion said about my book. Now, clearly, he said that he showed you a description of copyright, right? And there's no disagreement that what he showed you was actually correct with regard to copyright. But what I do want you to understand is that there is a concept known as fair use. Now, I know that Brother Zion probably completely self-published his text. I know that he probably did that. But he didn't realize that this text is actually, they're my words, but it was published by the African Genesis Institute. And one of the main individuals at the African Genesis Institute is an attorney. We talked extensively about the images that are included in this book and even those that are included under fair use. By the way, he tells you it's a screenshot of a movie, but if you saw it, you know that that's not a screenshot, family. Actually, what it is it's a crop of the movie poster. So, just so you understand the context here. And in addition to that, you should also understand, if you've read my book, that I heavily critiqued the movie. That falls directly under what is called fair use, because I am critiquing something. But I know that he just wants to talk to you about copyright. Perhaps if Brother Zion and I knew each other before and I had seen his book, I would have cautioned him about it. Now he's going to say, I talked to him about his book before I showed it to you. Family, I want you to really get that when you're in a debate, you are actually looking to fully vet someone's ideas. That's what I did. For those of you who want to call it agent-like behavior, you're not familiar with how scholarly debates take place. Now, so let's move a little bit further. He says that I said that the Ten Commandments were plagiarized. I don't think I used the word plagiarized, because I think that the first people who borrowed from it did so with a bit of respect. The problem comes with later people who don't want to acknowledge their powerful sources. So I don't think I would have used the word plagiarize. That's an inflammatory term. But I did say that at least 8 of the tenets in the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, came from ancient Kemet. And he's going to say to you, he said to you that I did lookalike scholarship there. Folks, understand that if something is clearly earlier than the other by several thousand years, and those people try to argue that they were in that region and learned from them for a long time, this should stand to common sense that perhaps they got quite a bit of their understanding. Now, I don't argue that the Hebrew people were in Egypt. I don't argue that, at least not in the way that they describe it. They were there later, definitely. And they were also possibly there as a Hyksos. So let's be clear that this is where they get their stuff from. And if you really want to be clear, the Decalogue is not even the best way to see that there's borrowing. Just look at the instructions of Amenemop and compare it to the Christian Bible. Compare it. Compare it to the book of Proverbs. And then you're going to see how there are things that are verbatim taken from earlier Kemetic sources. Okay. He also says, I said that we don't know who first brought Ma'at. That's absolutely true. I can't tell you the name of the scribe that first uttered the name Ma'at. But that is not necessary, because Ma'at exists thousands of years before the sources he's trying to tell you. I did say that we don't know the name of the scribe who brought forward Ma'at. And I then started to speak philosophically about the fact that Ma'at has no origin. I was talking about the philosophical underpinning of who Ma'at was in the creation story. I was switching between, and if you look at the video, it's absolutely very clear. I was switching between a historical story and a philosophical spiritual story. Watch the video, and I know Brother Zion Lex knows this, but he's trying to do a little bit of intellectual flim-flam on you. By the way, take a look at what he says about Ma'at being first male. Being first male, and that I call Ma'at a female. By the way, I have no issue if Ma'at is not necessarily female and Ma'at is female. That's not my argument. I don't even see how spending as much time as he did on that, it doesn't damage our discussion whatsoever. Not at all. He continually tells you that things are bombs and things are blows, but if you listen to what he's saying, he must be fighting another opponent. I'm waiting in the ring for him to step in, and he's fighting somebody in the aisle. Those blows don't address me. Those blows don't even come near me. I don't even need to bob and weave. I'm standing in the ring with the referee saying, look at that. What is he doing? And the referee's just going, I don't know, because nobody knows what he's doing. The arguments he's making are not in our topic. They don't address my issues, and they don't impeach anything I've said to you. So please listen carefully to what Brother Zion Lex says. He also says the 42 negative confessions are proof of an earlier legal code. It's really interesting that he wants to talk about a legal code when the initial description of the very parameters for the legal system come from ancient Kemet. I know he knows this. I showed you the judgment scene. I showed you the jurors. I showed you the judge. So how dare he, the grandchild, try to tell someone who was an elder in the grandparents' tradition about the legal code? I gave you that word, son. So you really need to understand that what he's saying doesn't make sense. And by the way, the 42 negative confessions are in the New Kingdom. Was he not paying attention to my presentation? I think he was doing work in the back. So he didn't hear what I said. Very clearly, Ma'at is described before the 42 negative confessions. It's described in the pyramid text, the coffin text, almost all of the wisdom literature of ancient Kemet, called the Sebayit literature, like the Book of Amenemop, like the Maxims of Ptahhotep. I don't know where he's going with that. By the way, the other thing that he does is he spends a lot of time debating people that are not Jabari el-Sadeh. He even tells you he's debating Garfield. Last I looked, my brother Garfield was not here. I didn't talk to him about whether the dynastic race theory is racist. I saw in his book that he said that one of the reasons why it was discarded was it was racist. But what he didn't say is then he says, well, maybe we should look at the theory. So what are you doing? What are you doing? You can't say it's racist and then say, well, maybe there's some points to it. Because if you say it's racist, then why are you using it? I didn't use that against you. And you know why I didn't use it against him? Because for all the fact that we have disagreements, I know Brother Zion Lex are from the same community and have very similar ideas. He's not going to try to big up the Tomhu, the European, instead of Africans. I would never say that about him. There's some other Hebrews that I will make that claim about. I'm not going to make that about him. I realize that while we're debating, 90% of the things that we understand, we agree on. We're talking about that 10% because family steel sharpens steel. And it's critical for us to come to an understanding of the things we disagree on. But that doesn't mean that he's not my brother and that we don't agree on very much and about the fact that we have to move forward in our community. Let me do two final things and then I'm going to close with this rebuttal. He mentions that he talks about all of the European scholars that are cited. He tries to say that they're the fathers of Egyptology. And honestly, they are the fathers of Egyptology. But we know that Kemet is an African land. The only reason why we don't have earlier African scholars that have access to this knowledge is because of a little thing called the transatlantic slave trade. So yes, we did not have access to sources. We did not have access to higher learning. So we had to go and look at somewhat honest European scholars like Gerald Massey. There's nothing wrong with that. I cite Massey in my book. So why would I insult him about using some European scholars? He read my book. He sees that I cite European scholars, and I critique them as well. You have to actually vet their ideas. And so that's really important. And then he also says that the ancient Kemetic people were fighting the Asiatic people. I'm not sure why he spent so much time on that. Is he trying to argue that Asiatic people are the Hebrews? But if he's arguing the Asiatic people are the Hebrews, I thought they were African. I'm not sure when he comes up, he's explained to you why the ancient African people were had defeated the Asiatics. What is he doing? Because you have to understand, family, that you can't lose the forest for the trees. What Brother Zion Lex is trying to say, he's trying to impeach Kemet by way of saying that its ideas come from Sumer. And then he wants to imply that the Hebrews were in Sumer. I'm going to tell you very clearly, first of all, that Kemet is Kemet. It has an African source. Sumer is a contemporary society that also has an African source. But the Hebrews weren't in either of them. The Hebrew people have a habit of writing themselves into the histories of greater ancient people. So with that, I want to turn things over to Brother Zion Lex. I'm sure that he's going to have some ideas about my concepts, and I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much. Peace.
Here we go. So here we are, round two. Thank you very much. So you heard from our brother Jabari. He gives his rebuttal, which I must say I like his delivery better this time. He says that I gave a more spirited dialogue. I like his delivery. But let me move forward with Jabari. Jabari has a habit, at least throughout this particular setting, when we're actually providing a PowerPoint. If you notice, anything that Jabari showed of me, and I want you to look back at the video, scroll back on YouTube. He showed everything that was mine on this side of the screen and everything that was his on this side of the screen. Mine has a date, and then he tells you he disagrees with the date, or he tells you that Zion Lex doesn't have a date. When you look on his, about 90% of them don't have dates. He just tells you what date it is. He just tells you what period it is. He doesn't even give you a citation. If you look at my earlier slides, every single slide had a citation. Jabari is here narrating history that is written somewhere, but he can't tell you where it is. That's not how we do scholarship. I'm sure Cornell University would have a problem with that. At least provide a page number or the book. You have an issue with a timeline, which we understand. I even became educated on that because I was a novice to presenting PowerPoints in this particular setting. And the kind of debates that I was used to, there was no need for a timeline. So I congratulate and tip my hat off to the Kemetic family for helping me to get better with timelines. So I've actually done that, Brother Jabari. Now he pulled up a picture of the Lamassu in Sumer, in Assyria. And he says, why would Zion Lex do that? I mean, this is the Lamassu, it's Assyria. Brother Jabari, do you know that there is no such Assyrian word, which Assyrians are Semitic, by the way, as Lamassu? Do you even know what Lamassu means? Did you check it out? Lamassu is a Sumerian word. And it came from the Assyrians who studied Sumerian literature and painted and carved and sculpted the depictions that they found in their literature. But you didn't do that. You went to Google and Wikipedia, something that the Kemetic community has a habit of doing. Now, he says, why does Zion Lex show you Asians in Kemet? What is Zion Lex talking about? Why does he show us Chancellor Williams' book? Why does he bring up the master teacher and show you that Chancellor Williams talks about Asians being the ones, the Asiatics, being the ones that King Menes had to conquer in order to unite Upper and Lower Egypt, which entails Asiatics controlled Upper and Lower Egypt, or at least a segment of it, in order for Menes to conquer them and then rule or unite the kingdom. Meaning Chancellor Williams places Asiatics as ruling pre-dynastic Kemet, something that Zion Lex's book is entirely based on. Sumerians, i.e. Asiatics, controlling pre-dynastic Egypt. And he says, why do that? Brother Jabari, do you even know the origin of the term Sumerian? Why does Zion Lex continually refer to the Sumerians and the Hebrews under the same breath? Jabari, do you know what the word Sumerian means? Do you know the origin of the term Sumerian? Do you know that the word Sumerian is actually Shumerian? And that the origin is actually Shemitic? Because I do know, because I saw you do it on video, the actual Cushites that lived in that valley known as Sumer today called themselves Sagiga, the blackheads. And they referred to their language as Emejer, the master tongue. So why do you make such a comparison, Brother Zion Lex? Well, let's check it out, Brothers Jabari. Let's examine the name Sumer. The name Sumerian is first found in the Akkadian epics, of which Akkadians are Semitics, where it is more accurately pronounced Shumerians. Sumerians came into Lower Mesopotamia in the Uruk period, which are the actual Cushites. They were preceded by a more advanced group during the Ubaid period, 6500 to 3800 BCE. The term Shumerian, according to the leading Sumeriologists, of which, you know, people, this is how we do scholarship. When I had an issue with Kemet, I referred to those that are known to be Kemetic scholars. We didn't see Brother Jabari quote a single Sumerologist. He didn't quote anyone as an authority in Sumer or even Assyria. He came and gave you what's called, in the academic world, feel-good scholarship. He's told it to you, his opinions and his ideas, void of the authorities on the subject. So I'll take the scholarly route and show you who the authorities are. The term Sumerian, according to the leading Sumerologist, Samuel Noah Kramer, in his book, The Sumerians, page 298, a citation. The word, it is derived from the biblical figure Shem. The word or name in Hebrew, Shem, and in Sumerian, Shumu, both mean name. In the Hebrew language, the word for name is Shem. In the Sumerian, or the Cushite language in lower Mesopotamia, it was Shumu. So we see a major relationship linguistically between what is called today the Sumerian tongue, Emejer, and the Hebrew tongue. When I want to say name, I say, hey, Shalom, Mashemka, what's your name? The Sumerians would say, Mashumka, what's your name? See, this is how scholarship works. So the term Sumerian, according to the leading Sumeriologist Samuel Noah Kramer, page 298 in his book, The Sumerians, Jabari doesn't quote or read the authorities on Sumer. He gives you feel-good scholarship. The word for name is Hebrew Shem, and in Sumer is Shumer, meaning that the Sumerian U is interchangeable with the Hebrew E, thus making the name Sumerian a designation not of the later Cushitic tribes, which represent the Uruk period or Uruk period, but it is a designation of the earlier Semitic tribes, which means when the Assyrians, who coined the term Sumerian, because the actual Sumerians call themselves Sagiga, when the Sumerians spoke, when the Assyrians or the Akkadians, both being Semitic people, spoke about the earliest people in that region as being Sumer, they weren't referring to the Cushite tribes. They're referring to the Semitic tribes who came there 2,000 years before the Cushite tribes did. But this is how we do scholarship, not feel-good lectures. I want to drop the mic. I'll drop it now. So now let's go into linguistics, because now, you know, when we're talking about the origins of civilization, keeping to the topic, thank you, Brother Jabari, if you had a problem. I'll try to acquiesce to your problem. We're now going to look at linguistics. These are some of the tools that we use in trying to investigate the origin of civilization. So we already showed you the oldest complete book is not in Kemet, the Maxims of Ptahhotep. Kemet cannot produce a book older than 2500 BCE, and I'll use the oldest date they have, which is the Maxims of Ptahhotep. But guess what? Something he still didn't address, because it's the truth and he cannot address it. The instructions of Shuruppak even outdate that, and that's in Mesopotamia, buddy. So let's look at it. The earliest representations of a Netcher or a deity is in Sumer. But let's look at the glyphs in Sumer. The glyph for a Netcher, a deity, or a god is this. This is what you see on the walls of the pyramid text, people. And this represents all of the Netcheru. When you look up inside the Merku, in Kemet, the Great Pyramids, this is what you find in the ceiling of the pyramid text. You find these star symbols. And every single Kemetic Grandmaster teacher that has a video in the last 5 years have all identified it with a deity. But the problem is, the first time we see this in any literature is in Sumerian literature. But let's go a little further. Look at the other symbol the Sumerians have for their god or a deity. And I want you to pay attention to the name because it's Dinger. But because no one in the Kemetic community thinks it's smart to learn the Sumerian lexicon, study it, or even familiarize yourself with it, they've probably never heard this name, and more importantly, don't know that the D is silent. So you would never look at Dinger, D-I-N-G-I-R in English, and say Dinger. The Sumerians would pronounce it Nedja. That sounds like what Mfudiji referred to as the oldest name, the oldest pronunciation for the deities referenced in Kemet, Netcher. But you find it in Sumerian literature. And we already showed you Sumerian literature is older than Kemet's oldest books, the Maxims of Ptahhotep. Because look, later on in the Per-Em-Heru, which is, let's give them 2350 BCE, we see this for Ra. But we see this in Sumer before then. So this is not feel-good scholarship or look-alike scholarship. This is scholarship. And I'll close off here and I'll leave the rest for the debate. This is the Sumerian symbol for Netcher, the Sumerian word for deity. I want you to examine the flagpole in Kemet, and I want you to admire and look at and study the similarities. And the dates that are put up here is based on the earliest writings that Kemet has showcasing a glyph for Netcher. But we see it earlier pronounced in Sumer. More on that during the debate. Brother Jabari, I want you to understand something about Zion Lex. You may disagree with some of my methods. You may disagree with me. But you will respect my scholarship. Peace and love to the black community.
All right,
I like
now.
respect my scholarship.
Now, what I want to do, 5 minutes to close it? 5 minutes, 5 minutes?
So what are we doing?
All right, family. I just want y'all to know, I want y'all to know that
that was just a little teaser. They have so much powerful information to show you. And before we go into that, I want to say, Brothers of Zion, way better presentation this time, brother. I definitely enjoyed it, especially your second round. Salute. Was it the second round? Yeah, the second round. Salute. You went in. You went in. Brother Jabari, of course, you know, you already know you do what you do. But I want to ask Zion a question. No, better yet, I'll just ask you the question.
Yes.
You got Asar here. And he got red, black, and green. What's that all about? Where did that red, black, and green come from, brother? Did he get that from Marcus Garvey?
You know what? I will honestly say to you that I don't believe the original statue this is modeled on has red, black, and green on it. But I am going to tell you that it's the reason why it stood out to me and why I got this one. Because I did like the fact that it seemed to be referencing Africa in a way that some of these pieces don't. And so that is, and I'm going to tell you that, you know, I travel to Kemet every year.
But you can't find the red, black, and green in Kemet?
I won't say that. I won't say that.
Oh.
Because I'm sure that I would look for it.
He showed it.
Well, I'd want to see that. What I show in Kemet is the red, white, and blue.
They showed that.
Because I've never looked for red, black, and green because I already know that I see they're Africans. But the red, white, and blue I show continually because I want people to understand that the Tamhu got their civilization from Kemet. So that's what I focus on.
These will be the crowns of kingship.
That's right.
Right? The white crown symbolizing Upper Egypt, and the red crown symbolizing Lower Egypt, and the blue crown was the war crown, correct? Well, it was the crown worn by the king when he went out in war,
true, but
right?
Let me say one thing to that. That's not untrue, but the reason why Kemet's colors were red, white, and blue, he's correct on the upper crown, which is called the Hedjet, and then the red crown that's called the Deshret. I'm confusing him now. It's been a long day, family. But then it's viewed that the Hapi, the Nile River, unites the land, and that was depicted as blue. So that's why the colors of ancient Kemet were red, white, and blue. Not necessarily because of the blue war crown, but because of the two crowns that represent the two lands and it being united by the Hapi. Let me say this really quickly. I enjoyed Brother Zion's presentation. I'ma still get at him, but you should expect that, family. I enjoyed his presentation. This is the level of discourse that I get excited about. He's put forth some ideas that I'm going to attempt to impeach, and I think I put forth some ideas that he's going to attempt to impeach. But we're going to have a dialogue. If you miss our debate in December, you are going to regret it.
Tell him what
because the reality is, I don't remember who's on the other one.
Muhammad and Minister Inky.
Ali Muhammad and Minister Inky. Did you remember who it was?
Yes.
No. Oh, I didn't because I was thinking about us. but feel this though. But feel this. If you miss it, you're going to regret it because you're going to look at it later on YouTube, but it's not going to be the same as being in the house for that kind of power, this kind of discourse. Because when you're there, you're going to have conversations with the other family who are there. When you're there, you're going to have conversations with us. When you're there, you're going to get a chance to see the man that brings it all together, Son Netter. You're going to see this wonderful brother here who is tired because it's been a long day. Listen, you better understand. You better understand it's going to be really powerful.
Chief Uziel.
Chief Uziel. Uziel.
Let me say, Son Netter makes a wonderful.
Yo, so Zion, let me ask you, Brother Zion. Were you holding back because you didn't want to really give it all to him for December the 17th, or you didn't really want to scare him off? Like, was you trying to hold back a little something?
Well, I want to say this. It's the mark of intelligence to not show all your hand. You know what I mean? And one thing I could appreciate about Brother Jabari is that I don't have to go so far as to discredit his scholarly attempts to discredit how I feel about what his conclusions are. The brother's a scholar. I would tell you to buy his book, 7 Little White Lies, and figure it out. He's definitely a scholar. Even the tit-for-tat, pit-pat I took at the book does not negate the scholarship he brought in the book to tear down the racist notion that Europeans have anything to do with classical civilization. We birthed civilization. Africans and we can't forget our Hebrews that composed that. So with that being said, I certainly held back. Okay. I have about 15 slides. Brother Jabari certainly held back. He didn't show the rest of his slides. And based upon the dialogue we had today, believe you me, there's going to be some new ones. You know what I mean? On both ends. So I appreciate the dialogue today. I hope that the community benefited. I also want to say, family, in the midst of us talking about this dialogue right now, let's not forget the family in Houston. Right. Let's use this opportunity to talk about what's going on. Brother Jabari, my brother Chief Uziel, who's standing right here next to me, he was also on camera earlier, off camera, and Jabari and Sarnetta and Chief Uziel discussed some of the plans that we can actually implement to actually help viably get our people some help on the ground. It really, really helps. At the end of the day, the debates are going to cause us to become one as a people, because a people divided in thought are self-conquered in action indeed. So we first must unite in thought, so the debates play their purpose. But we must use this moment to talk about the greater issues as well. And I respect Brother Jabari. I disagree with some of the things that were done in our earlier dialogues, and I'm sure he can say the same on my part. And I want to let the family know we are past that. Now, that don't mean that we coming in the ring December 17th with flowers for each other. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm coming in the ring with two things for Brother Jabari.
Let me listen.
I got guns and I got roses. But let me explain the guns first. You see, I'm coming in there to shoot down everything about feel-good scholarship and comedic romanticism that takes away from a scholarly effort at looking at African civilizations on a whole. And after I bury it, I gotta drop a flower on the grave.
I'm going to say this to you. I am the master of resurrection. I am Asar. So he thinks I'm going to be down. But you better understand I'm going to be more powerful if he thinks he's going to fire at me. So you better understand that when he comes, you have to ask him a question before I ask him a question. Why are we talking about Sumer? Is it because he's trying to say the Hebrews are Sumer? So I'm going to be prepared. I got some stuff. No. He gonna say there. Well, listen, I know what he's going to say. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be prepared to dismantle, to discombobulate, and to decapitate every single one of those concepts. I'm coming with it. And I'm expecting him to come with it. I'm going to tell you that, first of all, we had some disagreements, right? And we've settled those disagreements. We had a family you don't even understand. That's why Chief Uziel was yawning. We spoke for literally an hour and a half to 2 hours to try to get on the same page. We don't agree on everything. But please don't confuse debate for complete discord. That's my brother there. You know that we're both Guyanese. So some of y'all get it twisted and think that if I see him in the street and he had, you have? I'm half too.
Oh, okay, all right.
Look at this. Listen, this is becoming even more interesting. If I see him in the street and his tire is flat, you think I'm going to drive away? I'm going to make sure that my brother is solid because he is my brother. I was hurt by some things that happened because I saw him as my brother. I was upset because I saw him as my brother. If he was a Tom Who, I'd have been like, I expect that from the Tom Who. And he said the same thing about me. So we've settled that. But you better be prepared that the debate is not settled. You better be prepared that the discourse is not complete. When we come together in December, it's going to be fire. And if you're not there, you're going to regret it. Only on Sarnetta TV, who is bringing together scholars to debate ideas. This is of critical importance. I know y'all give my brother Sarnetta flack for all kinds of things. And the reality is, how many of the ideas would you have ruminating around your minds were it not for looking at his YouTube channel? Even those of you who give hate every video, you watched every video. Isn't that saying something?
Yeah, before the video even go up, it's thumbs up.
So you need to understand, that this is something that is powerful. And I'm going to tell you that some of you, and this is not this brother here, some of you are really upset because I've been really doing some work. I told Sarnetta, people have said nasty things about me for a long time, but never death threats. I'm getting death threats now.
Damn.
I'm getting death threats now. And Saudetta said to me, the death threats mean that you're doing something, so be happy. Of course, I told that story to my wife. She didn't find it funny. I was all laughing. I was like, she's not laughing. So anyway, understand that I can do nothing other than bring you the truth. So it doesn't matter whether you have death threats. It doesn't matter whether you meet me at my door. It doesn't matter if you meet me anywhere. I was built to bring you truth. When I have tried to not bring truth, to not do those things that I know I've been divinely ordained to do, it doesn't work well for me. When the Creator tells you you have a path and you deviate from it, there is a reckoning to bring you back to the path. So regardless of those of you who would like us to stop bringing you this information, we're going to continue to do it because this is our charge. So with that, you want to say anything else, brother?
I want to say salute to the HOK, salute to Sarnetta, salute to Brother Jabari and his wife, Onika, for allowing us to be here. Excuse me, Dr. Onika, for allowing us to be here in our home once again. I want to shout out my brother, Chief Uzael, for always holding me down. Everybody needs good, strong brothers around, behind, around them. And I must say, all credit, all respect, all glory to the Creator of my ancient forefathers, of our ancient forefathers. And I must say that these dialogues are especially important because at the end of the day, no matter what we all envisage as truth, there is ultimately one truth. And it's up to us to come to that round table to figure that out. So these dialogues must always occur until that happens, because when truth is there, black people will truly be free.
Powerful, brother.